Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and well, the D's overcame an opposition with 4 extra players to grind out a win in an ugly and perhaps uninspiring display on the big stage on Friday night. But the big test comes in just 6 days' time when we take the field to face our perennial enemy on King's birthday in a top 3 clash for the mid-season crown. Joining me tonight to have a whinge about some horrendous officiating on Friday night is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. No, I'm not going to whinge about the umpiring. That's your role. So
you did in your match report. So
yeah, well, I've still got to leave it up to the experts. I'm just pointing out what happened during the game. But it was still good to see service resumes as normal. The Demons another win in what was a very uninspiring game would be the most complimentary thing I can say about it. But we did warn the listeners that that's exactly what we were expecting. It's going to be scrappy, not good to look at. And so let's see how our predictions for the coming match against Collingwood shape up.
It was kind of unmemorable as well. There's not many things I remember about it. Also joining us tonight to discuss our win and also to preview our massive upcoming contest against the Filth is Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And I guess it was a good night. I didn't go in the end. It was a bit cold for me. But
I was looking out for you. That surprises me.
I was joking. Okay. I did go. I went by myself and it was fantastic. I sat up in the top of the Ponsford.
That's why I didn't see you.
I had a great angle and it was awesome. It was a good night. It was bloody cold up there, I can tell you. But I had a good vibe right from the beginning because in the pre-match warm-up, I don't know who's the DJ or who selects the music at the MCG.
The players are the DJs. If you look up on the scoreboard, it has that which player picked which song. So there you go. They're the DJs.
That explains it. Well, they had a cranking techno track, which I have to say, I was sitting there tapping my foot and watching on the through my binoculars, looking at different players. It must have been Track who selected it because he was dancing, he was thumping his thing, and you could tell he was into it. So.
I'm pretty sure when that techno, I think it was Jack Viney.
Right,
but yeah, I'm
really?
sure Track.
That surprises me. Maybe I'll see him clubbing one night. But it was a genuinely good track, and so it was quite enjoyable. And I heard afterwards. I didn't actually see it. I didn't pick it up, but massive kudos for the club for their support for the young fella, Jack Viney's young friend. John is his name, I think. Great from the club. They brought him out in a wheelchair.
Yeah. Yep.
Brought him through the banner, and apparently it was, a really, really touching experience for all the players, and they really involved him in the lead up and during the game, and so I thought that was terrific. I didn't know about that till afterwards, but I had a great night at the footy, and it's funny at the perception. I really enjoyed the game. It was
of course you did,
and I don't mean that because I'm not being contrary going, but what I enjoyed about it was. It felt so much like, how often on the podcast have we talked about games where all we've done is controlled it? Like the first half of last season, the first half of 21, where we've just controlled the tempo of the game and not allowed them. We'll get into that, how that was allowed to happen. But I think they really targeted this game, and Carlton are not fit enough. And so I think they look to take advantage of that. And it felt like those games where the three of us talked about, well, it was a pretty dull game, but we controlled the tempo. And we haven't done that all season, controlled the tempo of a match the way we did in this game. And so I really enjoyed it. It was like watching a boa, take the life out of the opposition. So, I really enjoyed it.
Well, I say it a bit later in my match review that And you know me, I'm always nervous. But I did, even though we were only 3 goals up for most of the game and most of that second half, I never felt like there was a small patch in the third, but I never really felt like we were in danger of losing, and that's very rare for me. As particularly, we can be 80 points up. I'm a little bit nervous, but I wasn't nervous for some reason.
Well, and that's exactly how I felt, and as well, and that's why it reminded me of 2000 or last year, the first 10 or so rounds of last year, and the first 10 rounds of 21, because that feeling like, even though the scores was only 3 goals in it, but it felt, I think our biggest margin was 23 points, but it never felt like they were going to come back at us. And I never felt concerned really that we were going to, I didn't think they were going to be able to do it. They just never. So that was a big factor. And I mean, how much did we stop them? But, I think they're in a world of trouble, to be honest, the Blues. And, as George said, I guess it's about framing expectations, exactly as George said. I expected a low quality, scrappy game. And I wrote on Demonland that these sorts of games ahead of the game, predicting that that's how it would roll, reminds me of going to the footy in the 80s and 90s, where it's contest to contest, and it's sort of a cold MCG, and the atmosphere was quite heavy. It was sort of dewy and cold, and that. I walked away happy that we got the 4 points. My main concern going into that game, in fact, my only concern was that we'd win the game, because it was critical that we won it. So, I walked away happy that we'd won it. No injuries. We got our defense rolling super well. We got our tempo game rolling super well. Some good individual performances. So, it made for a good weekend.
No injuries that you know of yet, because there's always surprises later in the week.
Don't get me started.
We have a question about that a bit later on, so we'll get to that shortly. We've got a big show tonight. We've got a lot of questions about this game, and we're going to do an extended preview of the next game. So let's move on. Each week, I ask our loyal listeners help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or on your preferred podcasting app. We love the feedback, and we'll read it out on the show. And the 5 stars absolutely help boost the podcast and get more people listening. Rabbits says, nudging the fan base in the right direction. Andy, George, and especially Bin Man are a totalitarian regime that I can't wait for each week. Give me these insights over the Gary Lyon fake sea bashing any day of the week. Keep on punching, boys. Well, thank you, Rabbits. Love the feedback. Demonland's own Wells11 on Apple Podcasts says, consistently excellent. Love this podcast. It's always a great breakdown of the game, the strategies used, and whether we win or lose. It helps me keep perspective. Something easily lost as a D's tragic. Really enjoy the insight, passion, and interplay between you all. Come on, Demonlanders, get on Apple Podcasts. Help out your brethren by giving us 5 stars like Brother Wells. Thank you, Wells11. Peter loving the footy says, rational thinking. Thank you, boys, for your weekly review of the games. I look forward to the podcast each week. I thoroughly enjoy your balanced views and rational thinking. Your grasp of the game, players, and coaching is a breath of fresh air. Most of the TV commentators are about creating controversy and often seem heavily biased or just plain ignorant regarding the statistics. The Ds get very little love from the media at times, almost openly barracking for the opposition. So it's very enjoyable listening to you boys. Keep up the good work. Go Ds. And thank you very much for that great review, Peter, and thank you for listening. Coach says, thanks, gents. Nothing surer in this pod than Binman's positivity, Andy's MFC SS, and George's straight shooting. Really enjoy listening to each week on the way to work, and wanted to thank you guys for all the time and effort you put into it. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Coach. And that's another Demonlander representing. Demon Tragic says, dear Andy, George, and Binman, last year we moved back to Sydney after living in Melbourne for 42 years. I would be suffering extreme footy withdrawal if not for you guys. Your podcast keeps me abreast of all the facts and opinions I need to know. It is fantastic. Thank you, Go Ds. Well, thank you, Demon Tragic. The feedback's much appreciated. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into the DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other Demons fans from around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show, there are also multiple topics and threads on all things Demons related. So join up to join in on the conversation. I assure you it's far superior to anything you'll read on social media. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer the call. I'll put you on mute. I'll bring you on when we can, when there's a break in the conversation. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message. We'll play it on the show. We've got a listener who provided a voicemail. We'll play it a bit later. If you are listening, you can join us in the chat room by simply heading on over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live almost every Monday at 8:30. Obviously not tonight, and also not next week, because we'll be live on Tuesday night because we're playing King's Birthday against the Pies on Monday. If you've downloaded this podcast, you want to listen to us live, please join us on Mondays or Tuesdays at 8:30 p.m. at demonland.com. Check your local listings. Well, this was a scrappy and unmemorable affair, as I said, on Friday night at the G. The game was marred by some dreadful umpiring decisions and, more importantly, in my humble opinion, by some equally horrendous non-decisions by the men in yellow. The 22-13 free kick count, though, was perhaps the only stat where the Ds were bested by their opponents. Our victory was also marred by our woeful set shot kicking for goal for the second week in a row. Our previous impeccable accuracy in front of the big sticks has been appalling in recent weeks, and the 13 minor scores were a testament to this. Perhaps the Ds will need a mini pre-season at the Choco Williams Goal Kicking Academy in the upcoming bye week. The Ds failed to capitalise early, though we dominated in the first half, keeping our opposition in the match. The 3-goal lead that the Ds held at the main break remained for most of the match, yet apart from a small surge by the Blues in the third, as I mentioned before, that I never really did feel that we would succumb and lose the game. The Demons' defence held strong and only allowed 39 forward entries. Yet more worrying for me is that we did not exploit our own 59 forward 50 entries, even factoring in our inaccuracy. Stephen May whipped out the blanket and smothered Coleman medal leader Charlie Curnow, holding him to a solitary goal. And many fans online lamented the game of Adam Tomlinson, who was given the job on Harry McKay, who, as predicted on this very program, somewhat overcame his yips, kicking 3 goals. But importantly, this move did allow Jake Lever to play his natural game, allowing him to take 12 intercept marks. And we'll no doubt talk more in depth on this later, but I think it's imperative that we return to the 3 talls in defence model, because we're a lot shakier in defence with just the 2. George, you noted in your match report on demonland.com, and welcome back to your match reporting duties, by the way, that the return of the 3 tall structure had the flow-on effect to others in defence, with Jake Bowie, before going off with concussion, amassing 8 intercepts, while Christian Salem and Trent Rivers picked up 20 and 24 touches, respectively. In the middle, Christian Petracca is going from strength to strength, consolidating his Brownlow medal credentials, racking up 32 disposals, 17 of those contested, 9 score involvements, 7 clearances, 4 inside 50s, and a game high 27 pressure acts and the goal. Jack Viney worked hard too, providing a lot of grunt at critical times. Our wingers did their part as well, and it was a welcome return to Lockie Hunter. And we say it all the time, our wingers are so important to the way that we play, the endurance to continually run up and down the wings and provide assistance in defence at one end and then forward forays up the other. It's just paramount to our structure and game plan. And after a quite few weeks since his return from a knee injury, Max Gorm was immense in the second half. He found a bit of touch, clunking marks, and finally hitting the scoreboard. And hopefully this turnaround in form continues into the back half of the season. Our forward line, however, was not so functional this week and continues to be a major concern for me, and we'll no doubt touch on this tonight. Having said that, Bailey Fritsch stood up, and had he been a little bit more accurate, he would have left the G with a bag. Jacob Van Rooyen stood up and took another step forward in his development. Love to see him with a little bit more tall support in the 50-metre arc. It wasn't the best spectacle of footy on the big stage, but I'll bank the 4 points. And the biggest test of the season awaits us on Monday in the annual Big Freeze Fight MMD match against the Pies. You can buy your beanie, scarf or socks at fightmmd.org.au to help fight to end motor neuron disease. And fellas, if you have them, I'll get you a brief. And remember that, the brief is brief. Thoughts on the match, and keep in mind the upcoming questions of our listeners. We'll start with you, George. Anything you want to add?
Pretty well summed up there, Andy. I was surprised how bad Carlton were for a team that's got so much talent across every single line. The game to me looked like watching an underage or under 12s game. It was all about me. It was all about kicking the balls just to the next guy. There was no teamwork operating. If they don't get if Curnow and McKay don't kick goals for them, they just don't win games. Would appear to be their modus operandi.
And they were at their best when they were taking the game on, going through the corridor, being unpredictable, and they just don't do that enough, do they?
They just don't. it was just a matter of time. And watching the game, it was when are we going to intercept this? When are we going to get the ball back?
They fell into our trap, our 2021, 2022 trap.
Yeah. I was just surprised how bad they were. Look, in all honesty, and this for the second week in a row, if we'd kicked accurately, even in the first quarter, the game would have been over by quarter time. We should have been 4 to 5 goals up easily. We were never pressed, ever pressed. Like you said, even though there was only a 3-goal margin at any time, Carlton were never going to win that. If Harry Mackay's kicking 3 goals and that's all he can do, and Curno's was absolutely taken apart by May, only finishing with the 1, they've got no other options. They're with that much talent, they should be up there challenging for top 4, and they simply aren't. So that's their problems, but it was good to see the return to form for a lot of our players. Our backline seemed much more stable with than what they have in the previous weeks, and that'll put us in good stead in the second half of the season, particularly.
Big man.
5 quick observations and a question to you, Andy.
Sure.
Observation 1, on the way in, I was listening to SEN and I heard, I don't know who it was from, maybe their player manager, Blues, was talking about they were going to be more proactive with their ball movement in this game. And as soon as I heard that, I thought that's a problem, because you don't go into a game against a team as good as Melbourne with a new way of doing things. And I think that they wanted to do that. They wanted to try that, but we stifled them. So observation 1, I don't think they're fit enough. Observation 2 is that Steve May seems to be getting progressively more mobile and better on the ground ball every week, and I thought he was just sensational. Third observation, I reckon Tomlinson actually played really well. Mackay, whatever.
Yeah,
whatever. I think he's the best one-on-one mark in the AFL.
Oh, he's fantastic. You can't stop some of those things, and they were out in front of him and up high, and there's no one stopping that.
When we talk about the stats, it was a low pressure game. A lot of those kicks inside 50 were under not much pressure. They were kicked to his advantage. No one would have, very few players, May included, would have, outmarked him on a couple of those occasions. So,
and plus the free that he got. Sorry to interrupt. The free that he got was not a free. I'm sorry. Our guys get absolutely molested and don't get frees. But
it's that need for that fourth umpire to get involved. Yeah. And it happened again later when they didn't pay that mark to Maxi, which anyway, get me started. The other observation is how much I love McVie, the way he plays footy, and that, I know it's a cliche with players with time, but he did this feint on the boundary line, and it looked really weird because it looked like everyone stopped. It looked like everyone thought the ball was going to go out, and and so did I watching live. I thought, right, the ball's gone out because all the players stopped. And the next thing I know, he's just sort of moving along the boundary line. Next play, he's classy. The next observation, the last one was Salo, is that I think I fall into the trap again, underestimating how important he is. We missed him for 9 games, and no one barely said, a big factor in our performances, including us, is Salem out, and he just makes such good decisions. He's incredible. He's so tough. He plays tough. He positions himself really well on the ground. And he's got a good dose of aggro about him, and just those under pressure kicks that he hits when he hits a target, they're just so critical in modern footy to maintain possession. So, I think having May getting back to his best form, Salem getting closer to his best form, and exactly as George says, third tall allowing Lever to play his best role, which is that intercept, that is a huge plus for us at the moment, I think.
You said you had a question for me. I'm waiting.
Oh, my question for you is, yes, why are you disappointed with our forward line? So I didn't quite, and it's a genuine question. What's the issue?
My issue, I think we should be playing with another tall, and I know we're going to talk about Smith a bit later on. I feel like we're Van Rooyen, he's very young, and I just would like him to have a more experienced head down there. But obviously we've got issues in personnel because T-Mac we got there. Ben Brown's obviously not up to it. So I'm just disappointed in that respect. And I don't know if we may be playing one too many small forwards. I don't know. There's just something I feel.
The reason I'm asking is because I keep hearing people say, and no one's challenging them. Like our head coach is saying almost every presser with a higher scoring team in the AFL. But apparently that objective fact doesn't mean anything. And David King on First Crack, neither one of his co-hosts even challenged him when he said, well, it's widely accepted that Melbourne has scoring issues and problems up forward. We had 21 scoring shots on Friday night. We kick accurately.
Yeah, I know. Yep.
You know, I mean, that's a pretty impressive scoring performance. Obviously, the accuracy was poor. It just continues to amuse me. We have 18 more points over 12 games of football than the Pies, who everyone rabbits on about their scoring power, despite the Pies winning 3 more games. And now, after 12 games, you can take out the argument that they haven't played the Eagles and Roos, because they have in the last 2 weeks. So, you know, you can compare the two. We're a better scoring side. That is just a fact.
I'm just greedy.
Yeah. I just think that's the least of our problems.
No, it's not. Look,
if we kick straight, there wouldn't be any conversation whatsoever, because we would be demolishing sides by 10 goals every week. But
and if we kick straight, we would have beat Freo, and we would have beat Port. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we'll talk more about
99 problems, and scoring ain't one.
So. Yeah, we'll talk about our accuracy woes of the last couple of weeks a bit later in the show. This week on the Stats Files, B-Man, you wanted to talk about key Demon stats, pressure, time in forward half, contested ball, and one or two other stats of interest, such as forward half turnovers. So take it away, B-Man.
Yep, our lowest pressure rating for the season, 170. So keeping in mind 180 is the considered AFL average. That last quarter was 148 to us on the pressure rating, 153 to them. So you know, that sense of that wasn't much of a last quarter was well earned. Our top 3 players pressure-wise were Petracca, Nibbler, and Viney. Curiously, Hunter was down on 26, and on my list, Salem didn't even register, so he must be under 26. So I would have guessed Zalo would have applied more pressure than that. Nibbler just is such a workhorse, isn't he? Time in forward half looked how we wanted to do, 58-42 our way. Importantly, it was 65-35 in the third quarter. Another good night for the clearance discussion. We won clearances, but we only scored 2 more points from stoppages from the clearances. Turnover was a lot more like how we like it, so that was better for us. We scored 4 goals, 7-31 to their 2 goals, 5-17. The big one, as George said, in terms of negative, was 5-10 from set shots, 5-10-40 from set shots. So we kicked 10-5. We win that game by a fair bit, which is why the expected score was 81-45. So on expected score, we win that game by 6 goals. This is a really important number, I think, is that they're number 1 in the AFL for contested possession, the Blues, even after this game. And we had 29 more contested possessions than them on the night, which is massive. That is huge for a team that is their whole game is based around winning the contest, and so we took that away from them. We dominated forward half intercepts 40-16, and recorded our forward 50 disposals were 58-29. And just while I think of it, last week I meant to say in a stat in the Freo game, in the second quarter, we had 1 effective disposal inside 50 in the second quarter. So that's just like hard to believe that's possible. So this number is really important that, that we're getting those possessions in the forward half. So, and as the expected score, it felt like with all of those stats, that's a shellacking, and that's reflected in the expected score, particularly the contested possessions, because that's such an important part of their game plan. And so, as Goody's talked about, is you want to get the game on our terms, the D's terms, and it was never on their terms at all. They could never, exactly as George was saying, they could never get the game going, and it was one of those games. It was hard to work out what they were trying to do, wasn't it, George? In terms of how were they trying to move the ball? And I thought Goody doesn't get much credit for tactically. I thought his tactics on Curnow were brilliant, and there was some really clever use of Smith is an interesting one. His role on Wiedering was a pure defensive forward, and but 4 or 5 possessions. It's hardly a huge display, but it was important structurally, and I think that was an element in enabling May to go with Curnow that up the ground. So those two things worked quite well, I think. So statistically, a huge performance. And, it's really interesting. Again, I put a lot of stock in Goody's presses. He's honest. And they were very pleased with this performance. They wanted to make that clear to push back against the narrative that, it was average.
All right. Let's get into our listeners' questions because we do have a lot of them. Phil C says, absolutely love the pod, boys. But if you guys spend the first half hour telling us how good we are, like on last week's pod, I'll struggle to stay calm. We are very average, unfortunately, but on the positive side, I thought JVR, McVie and May were great. Max was huge in the last quarter, of course. And D-Star9 answers, I absolutely love the pod and would be more than happy if you guys tell us how good we were. We were by no means perfect. That comes closer to finals time, but apart from putting scoreboard pressure on, there were so many positives in that game. And that sounds like a challenge for you, Ben-Man, from Phil C. But D-Star9 seems to want to hear more from positive binners.
Oh, well, I'm gonna go negative. No, we were terrible. No, I mean, I'll tell you something was funny. That I watched the game and I genuinely walked away happy. Of course, it wasn't a thrilling game to watch. Look at those pressure rating 170. That's how it looked. That's how it felt. I'd be worried if I was a Blues fan. The last 3 weeks, if you listen to what you can hear what key things are by when players repeat the same things in their interviews. So I've heard Lever, I've heard Track last week on 360. About a month ago, Brayshaw was on the couch. All of them were asked, what's your DNA? What are you about? What's these footy? And if you hear Goody's presses in the last 3 weeks, he's been saying the same thing. Defense, 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 defense. He wants to make a point of it. And when we break down the pies a bit later, I'll talk a little bit about how actually the numbers don't support us being the best defense. Remarkably, the pies are ranked number 1 for defense. We're ranked number 2 for attack. So, the numbers don't support some of those things. But that emphasis on defense is what we saw on Friday night. You could see that they were super focused on that defense and setting it up. And again, listening to Goody, if Lever was on SEN on Saturday morning, and Goody has talked about this a number of times. In his last 3 presses, he's raised this exact point: is we are not about now, we're about the finals. This is all about getting ready for the finals, and that includes experimenting with different positions. That includes moving the pieces around. That includes the game plan. I'm convinced that we've been trialing different things, different strategies. He's used the word experimenting probably 15 times in interviews through the season. And Friday night was terrific because it was like it was going back to the Demon DNA. What was weird is I watched the replay last night, and normally I just skip each quarter. I don't watch the halftime analysis, and happened to just leave it on, and then so started watching the halftime analysis, and it was like an alternate reality. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I think it was Brown, Lewis, Lyon, and Buckley. Well, and you'd think that Melbourne were a bottom 18th side, that the vitriol was incredible. How, and if you weren't an inside baseball sort of footy fan like I am and just a casual D's fan, you'd walk away having watched that and thought, we are got no chance to win the flag. You'd be a Phil C. That's Phil. Okay, yeah, no worries. Melbourne are terrible. We're 4th on the ladder at the halfway point of the season with only one team with a better percentage, with the Cats, with a better percentage than a team with 3 more wins. We're travelling pretty well, as Goody's at pains to say. We've got lots of growth, as Goody has also pointed out. So, yeah, we're travelling, arguably better than last year, despite the fact that we've got not as good a win-loss ratio. Injuries are okay. There's a lot to like. In particular, there's a lot to like with what our back half fixture looks like. We don't travel, as we talked about last week, till July. It's a much easier draw. So there's a real lot to like in the, compared to last year. Last year was such a difficult back half of the season, just fixture-wise.
Lazy says the game itself was average and a lot of people thought we were very poor. From my point of view, there were some key things. We are missing key personnel from our structures. We're clearly a bit down on confidence when it comes to execution and skill levels. We are possibly increasing training loads and or general fatigue has set in at this point in the season. On the other side of the coin, Carlton are also going through many of the same things, and for this reason I watched it with the full expectation of a tight, scrappy, low-scoring struggle with not too much fuss about perfect skills. I thought we did a lot of things well in this game. Pressure levels were great. Well, that's been mooted. Won clearances and smashed inside 50s. Do you guys think the comments about this being a pathetic performance are harsh? George, pathetic performance? It's got to be a harsh assessment, that one.
I think Bin Man's just covered that one pretty well. I'm still trying to reconcile the thoughts that we're too positive or totalitarian. I'm not quite sure where we sit at the moment, but yeah.
If we're totalitarian, well, I'm just going to say we're on top of the ladder.
Yeah, that solves the whole problem.
Everyone's on the same.
All right, well, let's move on because we've got a lot. Spirited Norm Smith.
Andy, before you go on, I'm not going to bang on tonight about fatigue and all of that stuff.
But we do have a question about it, but
I think that it's a big factor in right across the AFL in the last two rounds. If you've watched any footy, come on. Like the Collingwood's third quarter were against the Eagles. They were 2 down on the bench. They were average. They were just simply average. So, as were we, as were the Blues, as were multiple teams. But just so there's a number of stats you could look at too, and I found Denox shout out for this. Total kilometres run and kilometres at high speed. The last 3 games of the season have been our lowest total kilometres. So round 10, we ran 273 kilometres in total. Kilometres at high speed, 36 kilometres. Round 11, 276 total high speed, 37 kilometres. And this game just gone 272 kilometres total and high speed 40. Now you compare, I said last week, don't worry about looking at our game now. Go back to the beginning of the season and watch the first 3 to 4 games and you'll get a better sense of what our game plan will look like come finals time. So by point of comparison, in round 1, we ran 288 kilometres, 43 of which were at high speed. That's 16 kilometres more in a game of footy. 293 kilometres in round 2, and that was the Brisbane game, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So the Brisbane game round 2. So, that's massive. Up in the humidity, 293 kilometres. That's 21 kilometres more than what we ran on Friday night. 35 of them was at high speed, and round 3 was 284 to 44. So, that would be consistent across the AFL, that drop-off in kilometres run. I'm sure of it. There's any number of metrics that you could look at to make the argument that it's an AFL-wide thing, and particularly, as I've noted before, the contenders are now at the point at which they've got to prepare for the finals, and all of their numbers will drop off, including the Pies. The Pies numbers have dropped off completely.
I think people also forget our run into this game as well. 6-day breaks are not 7-day breaks or 8-day breaks that we're now coming into. We had a 6-day break into the Port game, which was wet and very tough as a game against the second on the ladder side. We had a 6.5 day break to Freo and then a 6-day break to Carlton. So we've had 3 games in a row with not much rest time for the players. It's not surprising they're fatigued at the moment. I noticed in Track's interview after the game that they were being given off until the following Tuesday. So a Friday night game, they were being given a break because we've now got a 9-day break till the Collingwood game, of course, between the two. But yeah, we were really hard pressed in the lead up to this game. It's not surprising the way the game was played.
And I suspect, this is my hope, but I also suspect that we started loading during last week at an additional heavier training block in order to be able to have time to taper into the King's birthday game. And I think that was a big factor in our performance on Friday night, as well as the fact that we look to control the speed and momentum of the ball. That's a great way to conserve energy. That's and another was our use of players. So maybe next week we'll talk about it, George, but those stats around the centre bounce attendances, way different from last year. So 86, 87% for Viney last year is down to 60-odd% this year.
Yeah, I think the loading will be after the King's birthday, because we've got a 9-day break to Collingwood, and they're not doing anything until Tuesday this week or till tomorrow. We've got a 10-day break to Geelong and then a 10-day break to GWS. So if you're going to do it, that's the time you do it, rather than following a couple of 6-day breaks. But
no, well, I reckon they will have had to have begun it by now. So they absolutely will have had to have begun it by now. They can't. So it's like, anyway, but hopefully we're fresh as on Monday.
All right. Spirit of Norm Smith has a number of talking points he'd like to discuss this week, and I'll go through them one by one and add some comments and questions that some of our other posters have made that relate to a particular talking point. Spirit of Norm Smith says, it was a horrible game to watch. So many turnovers, so many mistakes. Kane Corns described it as truly awful. Why? Our skills to hit a target was missing. Goal kicking was poor. MSC were bad. Carlton was simply worse. Hoof-hearted adds, despite having lower disposal efficiency and shooting a goal efficiency than the Baggers, we won virtually every other important statistic. If we can tidy up our kicking next week, we'll be very hard to beat. Is anyone else having a glass half full approach to the ugly win? Denox adds, on the footy field, skills can be poor because they are executed badly, or skills can be poor because they are executed under pressure. Was the Blues match a high-pressure match? We know that it's not. Or a sloppy, low-skilled match? What statistics would guide or justify your assessment? Well, we know our skills on the night were pretty poor. Our disposal efficiency was 69.6%. Our 2023 average has been 73.1%, so we're down there. The Blues actually were more efficient with its disposal efficiency of 75.3% on the night. Regarding turnovers, we had one less turnover than our 2023 average, but we forced the Blues to have 10 more turnovers than their 2023 average. Big man, you must concede that our disposal was pretty poor on the night. And the question posed was it a result of high pressure? You've said it can't be, because there wasn't a high pressure. So was it just sloppy skills?
Well, I mean, again, like, without beating the same drum each week, I think, there's multiple factors. One, I think we're not a generally high skill side.
Yeah.
Like, I think that is a weakness of ours, is that across the board we don't have as many. Our standard of kicking isn't as good, for instance, as Collingwood's. But there'll be multiple factors. George hit on one, which is the breaks between the two games. That's a huge factor.
So fatigue,
I think. Yeah, so fatigue just between them, the cumulative fatigue of the season that we talked about last week, that Selwyn Griffith talked about. I'm thinking maybe potentially also, the additional training loads on the track, but maybe not. Either way, for me, the multiple factors, but the biggest factor is fatigue. And again, just look at the games that were played over the weekend. I watched all of the footy this weekend, all of the games, because there wasn't a full round. And, it's just go pick another game. The Dogs couldn't hit a target in the last quarter. They
couldn't kick a
Geelong
goal.
Kicked 6 goals straight on them. The Crows, who Burgess, by the way, is their fitness guy, and so they're following a very similar program.
But they're playing in Darwin in sapping heat, and playing a team that had been there for the whole week.
35 points up and completely stopped. So even if you take apart whatever, you can. That's a great game. I watched that game and I was super confident
quarter.
and had a big go on it punting wise, because they were brilliant in what they did. For the second year in a row, the Suns went up there for 2 weeks. They played the Dog. They went up a week ahead of the Dogs game, beat the Dogs, and I was so confident the Suns would win that game. Less confident when the Crows got up by 35 points. But you could see the impact. If anyone wants to see the impact of fatigue, watch the second half of that game. They could not run basically anymore, Crows, and got dismantled. They Suns kicked 9 goals straight. And the Crows had a bit of a yelp at the end of the third into the fourth, and ended up getting just completely dismantled. And what's his name? Rankin. His disposal skills. So for such a skilled player, he could not hit the side of a barn, including he missed everything, running into a goal, running across his body. He was completely gassed by the time he kicked it. He was under no pressure and missed the goals completely. That's one of the most skilled players in the AFL. So, it's not just Melbourne at this time of year. It's all the teams.
Spirit of Norm Smith continues with his second talking point. Hunter and Langdon had good games, but their possessions reflect our slow and wide ball movement. Their heat map of possessions showed 8 out of 10 were on the boundary edge. Defenders love to have restricted areas to cover, and our forward 50s from out wide are easily cut off. Can we play the corridor more from now on? Now, I would expect that our wingers. I would expect our wingers to play wide. We're a better team for having two genuine wingers like Hunter and Langdon. Binman, can supporters who rate the importance of genuine wingers and what they bring to the team, and then also want us to use the corridor more, have their cake and eat it too? I mean, we've got these wingers, so we've got to use them out wide, And
well,
I guess
again, it depends. All of the bits of the game plan are interconnected. So, unless you've got multiple players who have got fuel in the tank to be able to run in waves, which is hopefully what we're going to see from both teams next Monday, is that you don't kick to the corridor because there's not options. In the first third of the season, we were taking those kicks on, and in particular, Hunter was taking those kicks on into the corridor often. So, it's a bit of, there's a bit of chicken and egg in that, I think. And I mean, obviously, Hunter and Langdon, are going to get most of their possessions near the wing. But I thought both were excellent, and I keep on getting more and more impressed by Hunter. He is physically a tough little bugger, isn't he? And, when I first saw that shrug he does, I thought, oh, okay. But it's a pretty neat skill.
Yeah, he gets out of it.
Yeah, his ability to evade tackle, but also his ability to jink left and right and create space for himself is brilliant. And he's got the same skill that I mentioned for Salem, his ability under pressure, when he's under intense pressure, to hit that 20-metre kick. It's like Daniel from the Dogs. For me, that's one of the most important kicks in footy. And it's one of the reasons, to be honest, we're going to miss Bowie's a big out, I reckon, because he had his best game for the season. I thought on Friday night.
Hunter's week off for the bump didn't deter him, because he gave another bump off perfectly legal, but he doesn't.
Speaking of week off, just while I think of it, if anyone thinks Hibbo is best 22, so which I do, and I'm guessing both you guys do too, we managed him. So by the logical extension of that is that we did not give ourselves the best chance of winning this match, because otherwise we would have selected him, his best 22. But we elected to manage him, and we did that because we're planning for the rest of the season. And that goes to my point about last week about it's not about the battles, it's about the war. If it was about the battle and this game being the most important thing that just happened, well, they would have picked him, wouldn't they? Just as they'll pick him next Monday.
And someone said Goody has mentioned that he will be managed throughout the rest of the year as well. So expect him not to play.
But it probably shows. I read somewhere on Demonland, I think you put it up on Demonland, a tweet that's sort of suggesting, I think maybe Chaplin, suggesting that Hibbo is a definite in.
Yep. He said both Clary
Hibbo and
Clary. But we'll talk more about that later, because there has been some other news. Spirit of Norm Smith's third talking point is Cozzy. We love him, but 3 times flying into packs and not crumbing had me scratching my head. Remember round 1? Wow, if he gets back to that, will be truly dangerous. Bush Demon adds, at one point, Cozzy flew for a specky in front of Max Gorham when he could have stayed down for the spoils. This has been a repeating pattern, with Cozzy Pickett continually preferencing goal of the year and mark of the year. We are going nowhere until Melbourne gets back to team first. Detox adds, I think Cozzy is an interesting talking point. He's averaging only 11 possessions a game, and tonight only had 3 kicks. Sure, he puts pressure on oppositions, but in my opinion, he's capable of much, much more. George, where do you sit with Cozzy's search of mark of the year in preference of staying down and waiting for the crumb? Is the experiment of using Cozzy through the midfield over? I don't believe he has attended a centre bounce for a couple of weeks. I wouldn't mind us using him in the middle every now and again just to get him back into the game.
Yeah, Cozzy's a shock troop. It's he might only get 11 touches in the game, but 10 of them are very important ones, and he gets the results when needed. He'll fly for the marks, but he's also got a very good recovery from from those scenarios. I can't remember the exact circumstance that was described, but even if he flies for it, he hits the ground and he's already crumbing regardless. He's not standing on the ground doing nothing. And that miraculous goal that he kicked from the boundary, that's Cozzy. And if you're a coach, you just go out there and do what you've got to do. Just keep doing it. Don't try and restrict him. We've tried the experiment with him in the middle. We'll see it again later on in the season. But we were forced in this particular game, particularly with Oliver's absence, to be looking at more grunt-type players in the middle. So we saw Brayshaw being used in this game. Harms being used in this game, but we've got options with Cozzy. I'm not worried about him. Everybody expects him to kick 6 goals a game, but it's not going to happen, I'm afraid. So just enjoy the ride, folks.
I don't think you did see Harms in this game. You might have been thinking of Sparrow. It wasn't Harms suspended.
Sparrow, sorry, yeah.
That was right below me, that mark, and I screamed out, Cozzy, stay on the ground. It really frustrated me, to be honest, because not only was Gawn in that pack, there was another forward as well. Like, he just had to be front and centre, and he was next when he, a bit later he got that goal he got. He was front and centre from memory. That was so I thought actually that I don't want him jumping for a ball when Max is in the contest. He's a crummer, so that I agree that was a bit frustrating. That was right below me. That goal was just unbelievable. His ability to find space at first I thought he kicked it between the player's leg, but he hadn't. But he still kicked it between 2 players who were sort of diagonally, like the door was closing. But as you say, George, you've got to take the good with the bad, because about 3 or 4 minutes later, maybe it was a bit longer than that, Cozzy went for a ridiculous goal kick from the from the boundary line, and he just pulled off that goal. So maybe good is going, just go for it. But Nibbler gave him a big spray because Nibbler was in the corridor and the play was to centre it. But, he just kicked a miraculous goal. So again, on the fatigue, it's the younger players who are most impacted by fatigue. He's only a kid. How old's Cozzy now?
22,
21,
I think. 22, yeah.
20. So he's 20. A baby. So he... and all of those younger players, they're running on fumes at this time of year. So, your point is a really good one. He's a shock trooper, isn't he? So, he bursts, and so he needs to be as fresh as possible to do as most sort of damage as possible.
Spirit of Norm Smith's 4th talking point is our defence. 3 tall defenders, Tomo on McKay, May on Curnow. Lever played his intercept role. It showed us a better structure than Lever marking the second tall forward. Tomo to cover until Petty is back, in my view. D. Old Fart adds, many Demonlanders have recognised the value of having Tomo in the team against Carlton because it improved our defensive structure and enabled our other defenders to play to their strengths. The outcome was clear to all. Travi14 says, amazing how May looks back to his best with another tall down back. Tomo stays in for mine. We've got a voicemail from Rue Beauty, a Demonland member. So let's have a listen to that now.
G'day, boys. Rue Beauty here. Love the pod. Long time, first time. Wanted your opinions on a couple of players. Firstly, Adam Tomlinson. There's been a lot of commentary both from the media and on Demonland about playing Harry Mackay back into some sort of form and that he's not up to AFL standard. With him back in the team, it allows Lever to play his best football, and Tomo is a much better third tall than a second tall, which he had to play at the start of the season with May out injured. I tend to look at it from a team point of view, particularly with our defensive structures. If you'd have asked Demon fans before the start of the game if they'd be happy with only conceding 44 points in a game, I'm sure everyone would have taken it. I concede that it was against the Carlton side that hasn't kicked a decent score in weeks, but with 2 Coleman medalists playing, there's always a chance for them to go large. So my view is don't judge Tomo on getting 3 kicks on him. Judge the defence as a whole unit. And if you do that, how can you be anything but happy?
I think that's an excellent point. I mentioned in my match wrap-up having the third tall, allowed Tomo. He effectively took one for the team, allowed Jake Lever to be Jake Lever, and the result was the 12 intercept possessions, and was simply a better side with 3 talls in defence. My preference obviously is Petty over Tomo, but Pets is still at least 2 to 3 weeks away. I'm not convinced that he's not going to be plonked back into attack on his return. Big man, your thoughts on 3 tools in defence? You've talked about on previous podcasts about the smaller defence to get the ball that hits the deck. Do you think we're going to revert to this structure for the remainder of the season, or at least for the next couple of weeks? Got Geelong coming up as well.
I have no question whatsoever. I mean, again, the 2 is part of the experimentation. We've tried it a few times. Hibbo plays a bit tall, so you can do it a little bit. I've got no question in my mind that Goody's preferred model is 3 talls, as everyone's talked about. Lever then can do what he's best at doing, and as you hear often enough, the art of coaching partly is to make sure that every player is able to play their best game. I totally agree with the caller's comments about Tomo, and I think the real test about Tomo is Goody didn't take him off him. If he was worried about the performance, Goody would have moved him. Exactly as what was the caller's name?
Rue Beauty, Rue as in Van Rooyen.
Exactly as Rue Beauty said, and this is exactly what Lever said on Saturday morning on Crunch Time or whatever it is on SEN, is that they're a unit down there. They play, they celebrate their successes. When I watch the game through binoculars a lot, and before the game, I often look at the group of players, and it's really interesting. At the quarter time break huddles as well, is that group gets together, or after a goal, after conceding a goal, and get together, and that energy that they have, they're a unit. Their only number that they would have been worried about is the 44 points the opposition scored. So. 17 points, I think they were at halftime. The coaching staff would have been thrilled that they'd kept them to 2 and a bit goals. So Tomo did his job. As I said before, I reckon McKay's the best one-on-one mark in the AFL, maybe Norton, but I reckon he tops Norton in a pure one-on-one situation. No Shane would be outmarked by him.
Lastly, from Spirit of Norm Smith, Track was clearly BOG, 3 Brownlow votes. That's 17 votes from Track already on my calculations. If the umps have any idea, May, Riv, Sparrow, McVie, Salem, Fritter and Lever and Bowser until concussed as my other best players this week. Obviously, a defender's game this week. And while I would always prefer a flag over individual awards, I really do hope Track can snag a Brownlow. He's been fantastic this season. He deserves the accolades. He stood up in the absence of Clary. He's well-spoken. He's a great ambassador for the club. I just think, unfortunately, with Clary, with his mate Clary, they're going to pinch votes off each other and probably cost each other a Brownlow down the track. But Track is, I don't think probably doesn't have 17 votes, I wouldn't say. But, he's well up there, I would think.
And you just got to, I watched him on the weekend on Friday night and thought, how much do I love seeing a player of his quality in the red and blue? I mean, he's not only is a brilliant footballer, he's a genuinely good person, it would appear. Like he is a solid citizen. And I watched the replay, as I said last night. He got really angry at one point, and with an opposition player, and also with a umpiring decision that went against him. And it crossed my mind that you very rarely see that on the field from him. He's very even-tempered. The other thing that really jumped out at me when I watched the replay is how good he is at making decisions under pressure. So, I knocked his ball handling a bit last week, but he was clean on Friday. It was handy that it wasn't wet. But under pressure, he makes good decisions, and his ability to kick across his body means that he can open up that whole field. He's got such great peripheral vision, and I mean, he's just a star, isn't he?
And the other thing is that's been developed probably more this season than previously is the depth of his kicking. That when he gets a possession in the middle, it finishes up in the goal square almost, puts the opposition under pressure immediately. Whereas there are plenty of other players in the league who get multiple possessions but don't actually cause any problems to the opposition. So, he is completely damaging with ball in hand. And,
Andy, I know you love midfielders who kick goals. His accuracy this year from set shots has been brilliant. I saw it come up on the replay last night, and I think it maybe it's 9-3 or something, or something like that.
Yeah, he's definitely changed the way he approaches goal. So he was probably a gold star recipient in the Jocko Williams Goal Kicking Academy over the summer.
Yeah.
He definitely reaped the rewards of that coaching, because
and that shot was really important because we'd had the better of that first period of the first quarter, and it was such a brilliant kick from Fritsch inboard, wasn't it? Because he had to hit him in three Blues players around him. Key is to go back and kick that 45 metres on an angle. That was right. I was literally on an angle looking at him. That was just to the left of the goalpost at the top of the Ponsford, and it barely deviated that kick. That was just a beautiful kick, and at an important time. There's one more comment about Petracca. Is the thing that I think he's changed, where he's gone to another level this year, is his consistency. Like his numbers, he's consistently plus 25, and it doesn't seem that long ago that we were talking on the podcast about, well, the key for Track to go to another level is start averaging 20 plus possessions.
He's nearly at 30, I think.
Yeah.
Deceiving says, gents, love the show. My question is regarding our clearance work against the Blues. Whilst not entirely clean, we perform much better in this space than previous weeks. Is that a result of a tactical adjustment, greater work rate, the Blues not being very good, or something else? And looking at the stats, we narrowly won the hitouts 33-28, so not much of an advantage there. Lost the centre clearances 8-9, but smashed them at the stoppages, as we mentioned, 30-20. Do either of you have any thoughts on our clearance game? We've been losing clearances all year, but did we change anything against anything this week, or are the Blues poor? We know they've got a star-studded midfield, or they've got on paper a good midfield, but they're definitely underperforming. So do we just take advantage of that, George?
It's a bit of a mixed bag there in terms of clearances. We've spoken before, it's all about the quality of the clearances, not just getting your hands on the ball. We did particularly well in the absence of Oliver. Viney and Petracca really stood up to hold the fort. But you're up against Chera and Cripps, who are pretty damn good at clearances themselves. What really surprised me, though, was the rucking. I don't think we got the real value that we should be getting out of both Max and Brodie at the moment. Silvani was off at half time.
Yeah,
that's their backup ruck. So De Koning had to do basically the whole ruck in the second half. I thought we would have had far better numbers come out as a result of that, but the reality was that we probably didn't take as much advantage of it as we could have. But
that's 2 weeks. 2 weeks in a row where the number one, well, not the number one ruckman, but one of the ruckmen has gone out at half time. So we've just solo rucked, and not really had advantage.
I think that was the reason why Max came good, in particular in the second half around the ground.
Yep.
He was able to, one tall less on the opposition to fluster you as you're moving around the ground, and that was great because I think that built Max's confidence. He's hasn't been performing as well as what we could expect post the knee injury, but he certainly changed it up in the second half of this game. So we'll have to see. We will be tried this week against Collingwood in terms of the midfield and the clearance scenario.
Mandy Lorian says, absolutely loving the podcast, knocking them out of the park on a weekly basis. The analysis each week helps put the losses and the ugly wins into perspective. Would love to get the panel's thoughts on Joel Smith's game, whether they think the Ds will persist despite really not denting the stat sheet. I thought he played his small part. Oh My Ds adds a question which probably belongs in the upcoming preview section of the show, but it does relate to Joel Smith, so we'll tackle it now. Oh My D says, Darcy Moore is a pivotal part of Collingwood's back line, and at almost 6'8", he presents an imposing challenge for the Ds on King's birthday. While he had a seemingly quiet game against the Blues, is there a case to have Joel Smith play a defensive role on Moore? Weber replies, read my mind, thought Joel played a good role last night, echoed, I reckon, by Goody's comments. He might just be the man to make the best defender in the game accountable. If not him, then who do you podcasters reckon may get the gig and how? D. Old Fart says there has been less Demonland commentary about Joel Smith's game against the Blues. I thought his importance to our forward structure was equal to that of Tomo's down back. In my opinion, the role he played contributed significantly to the improved form of JVR and Fritter, and I see Joel as a lock for King's birthday. What do the panel think. Travie14 adds, also thought Smith played an important role as more of a decoy than a key forward, and I've never been a Smith fan, so it has taken a bit to say that. Doug Reamer asks, can you see us using Joel Smith to keep Darcy Moore accountable? Even though he only had 5 touches last week, his pressure was the best of the other key forwards we've seen this year compared to Brown and Shaki. And before you guys answer, I've got a voicemail again from Rue Bruty. That's the second part of his voicemail.
Secondly, Joel Smith, his stats weren't great, but if you were at the MCG on Friday night, the work he did off the ball was excellent. He's got such a good jump. He can play tall. But what impressed me was when the ball hits the deck, he gives plenty of chase and applies tackle pressure, which is more than you get from Brown or Shaki when the ball is brought to ground. Coincidence or not, Joe VR had one of his best games of the year. He looked great playing up the ground, providing a target and setting up play with some really good handballs. Maxie's comments on Smith after the game suggest to me that if Smith stays fit, he'll stay in the team. Just your thoughts on those two players, boys, and go D's.
So, George, what did you make of Joel's game or the role on the night? And is using him as a defensive forward to make Darcy Moore accountable a sound tactic?
I don't think Joel gave us a great deal in the game, but I think what we're going to see is he's certainly going to play this week, particularly in the absence of Petty, where Petty's being slotted more in the forward line. Joel's got his opportunity now, so we need another tall. I think he'll be basically told this week to stand alongside Moore and don't even try and kick a goal. As simple as that. Because Moore, I looked at Moore's statistics for the season. 2/3 of his marks are uncontested. We simply cannot allow Moore to have uncontested marks intercepting in the back line for the whole game. Joel Smith is about the only tall that we can trust at the moment to at least go with Moore. I saw the Casey game and Brown and Shaki were uninspiring as well. I don't think they're the right people for the job. They've got different roles and tasks, but I can see Joel staying in there and just nullifying, and that would be a great positive, just nullifying the effects of Moore in the back line, because I think Moore is so critical to the way that the Collingwood defence operates. If he kicks a goal or two here or there, well, great, that's fantastic, but I think that'll be a bonus to us.
I agree, and he played that role on Wiedering, and Wiedering didn't have the influence that he normally did. I mean, Wiedering's such an important player for exactly the same reason as Moore is for Carlton. It's slightly different, but both intercept markers. I'm a huge Smith fan, so I was hoping you'd tear the game apart and take a screamer and say 5 possessions. But I think the point that Rebuty makes is a really good one. If you're at the ground and at the Ponsford, is the amount of cross the ground running he did to shut down switches and options was super impressive. And because I'm a Smith fan and want him to do well, I had a real focus on him in the game. His attack on the ball was fantastic. There was a couple where he got tackled, but he went super hard at the footy. He'll definitely play this week. I think he is a real chance of staying in the side if he can get it, his form going. He's just a great athlete. So he's he covers a lot of ground. So he did a lot of, because I was watching him, he did a lot of unrewarded running. And on the tracker, the Telstra tracker, he was our fastest defender there for a big chunk of time, and also the most kilometres, forward. He's speed in forward. He's quick as well. And just on George's point about the importance of Moore, and it's not just Moore, it's also Murphy and Quaynor. In that game against the Eagles, they were pretty average really, but it was their ability to score from turnover that was the difference. This number's nuts. They scored 11-5, 71 points from turnover, from intercepts, from getting the intercepts. And a big factor in that was Quaynor, Murphy and Moore had a combined 20 intercepts between them, 13 of which were marks, which is pretty crazy really. And so 6 of the goals that they got, 6 of the 11 goals that they got from intercept turnovers last week against the Eagles came from those three players intercepting. So exactly right, George. It's so important that we keep Moore's influence out of the game. And I feel like Moore's a bit of a what's the word? Like he's the whole team lifts when he lifts, and the way he plays. So if you can keep him quiet, I think that will go a long way to keeping their spirit down.
Demon WA says, interesting to hear the loading/fatigue discussions again in various threads on Demonland, especially interested in the sub-theory that has emerged regarding our preference to revert to percentage tactics, that is moving the ball around the flanks, etc., that has come back since the guys have been more fatigued. Think there is some merit to this, but keen to hear everyone's thoughts on what sort of game style and freshness we will see on Monday. Fanatic Demon adds, I love the podcast and I appreciate Big Man's positive take on virtually everything related to the Demons, but I'm not sure how I'm going to cope with another dose of loading as the excuse for our very ordinary performances over the last few weeks. Now, Big Man, you have already talked loading, but this question from Demon WA, it's in your wheelhouse. Have we reverted to playing the percentages and going the safer options around the wings as fatigue and perhaps loading period has set in, but Fanatic Demon doesn't want to hear any loading excuses to take it away.
Well, I think we did against Carlton, and I think it's connected, though, is that they couldn't hurt us. And I said this at the beginning of the year. I've said this. I said it in the first podcast. Carlton will struggle because they had 3 or 4 key players, including Walsh, who only completed, or Walsh none, but who missed big chunks of that critical January, February time. So you
called it early on in the year about Walsh that you said because he had missed all that time that it's going to struggle.
Of course, it's no mystery. And so we could afford to do that against the Blues because they were never going to – we could probably afford to do it against almost every club this weekend because all the clubs are struggling running across the ground. And so that model that we played on was a throwback to last year where we constrict teams' ball movement. The way to beat it is what Collingwood have done, which is fast ball movement. But if you're fatigued, you can't run fast. So, I think that's definitely what we look to do, which gives me some sort of confidence that I personally, and this is pure confirmation bias, so – but I think we're focused on being as fresh as possible against the Pies. If I just think that there's a lot riding on it. The way they're talking, I feel like I just have this sense that the D's want to take down the Pies a peg or two because they're the most overrated football team in the last 20 years, I reckon. I just drives me nuts, this narrative about the Pies. None of, the 11-1, like, yeah, great, 11-1. I heard someone say on one of the shows, all teams for the last 11 years, the teams who have been 11-1, 6 of them have won the flag. Well, that means nearly 50% of them haven't, including Melbourne last year. So I just think that they're an overrated footy side, and I feel like Melbourne want to make a statement. And so I think a lot's revolving around it. Maybe that's just me hoping that's how how we'll look. But that's my best guess.
And I think we might be seen to revert to type, but Carlton scored 44 points because we reverted to type. That playing around the wing is the safe way to play, particularly when you're tired and you can't run as hard. So down the wings, it looks boring to fans. We've spoken about this before. It is frustrating as hell to fans because everybody wants to see 20 goals kicked in a game. It's not going to happen, particularly at this time in the year.
So my best guess, this is a total guess, like people can take what they want from it, reject it, whatever, is that we started loading in the week between Port and we started, let's not call it loading. We increased our loads on the training
loading
ahead of the Port Blues game, and all the numbers exactly track that way. The pressure was our lowest for the season. We ran the least number of kilometres for the season. We played a slow, controlled ball movement that conserved energy. I think because we knew that Carlton couldn't exploit that our fatigue. I think that, will be – I read Kev's report this week for the training, heaps and heaps of running. Heaps of running. He made that point twice in the training report.
Yeah,
that
we'll read that
ease
later.
off. They've got 9 days, and so that they'll do that running. I take the point that they had the time off till today, but they'll run hard in the next few days. So I'll be interested what the training reports say, and then taper into King's birthday to be optimally fresh, which is all why Hibberd was not picked. It's why, of course, they wouldn't take a risk with Clary. If we really wanted to win the game, we would have played Clary. So I think it also makes a lot of sense, sort of emotionally and spiritually, if that makes sense, to be in the best shape and optimal shape to beat Collingwood at the MCG on our home ground, on our home game, on the first King's birthday for 50 years or whatever it is since there's been a King's birthday, 100 years. At least that's what I'm hoping.
The answer to this next one may be related to the last one. I'll read it out anyway. Fritter the Hair Goat, and that's a great username, says, not so much a direct question, but I thought in last week's game we looked the most Melbourne we have in a long time. The classic defence and contested ball formula was back. The team set up a fantastic defensive zone, forcing long contests down the line. Our interceptors did the job, and overall the team looked confident and poised at the back of centre at least. Do you think after experimenting with a more high-octane game plan in the first half of the year, Goody and co are maybe reverting back to the formula that has given us success in the past? And do you think that the first half of the year, the coaching staff have refused to show their hand, which we're maybe starting to see now? I thought apart from some terrible goal kicking and inside 50s, we were actually looking really good on Friday, and I feel more positive about the game than some others on here. Maybe it was due to the poor quality of the opposition, but keen to hear your thoughts on it anyway. Freda the Hair Goat had a different take about the reversion back to the down the line game. He sort of is intimating that perhaps we were hiding our true game plan, or was loading and fatigue the reason we reverted back to perhaps the 2021-2022 Demons game. Will we return to the high-octane corridor method after the break? Might we see a mix throughout the remainder of the season? Who wants to take that? We didn't change things.
I just think there is no. It's this point I've been trying to make the last couple of weeks. Is each match needs to be looked at in isolation, not as some sort of major, spoiler alert for how we'll look in the finals. Again, I'll come back to my point. Look to the first 3 games when we're optimally fresh, fit. We've come off our January, February training period. We're roaring to go. Those numbers that I said about the distances we covered, that shows how much running, that extra running we're doing. That's what the game plan will look like come finals, hopefully. The first half of the season, Goody he said it, as I said before, lots of times, experimenting with different things. I think they're playing ducks and drakes a little bit with the Pies, to be honest, is my feeling, in terms of deliberately keeping it fluid, in terms of experimenting. Whatever way it spins, though, is the Goody's point about defence being at the heart of the way we want to play footy is true. And we'll talk about it a bit later, about that whole idea of where does someone sit. And we mentioned it a few weeks ago. Where do the coaches sit on that scale of offence and defence being at either end of the scale? Goody is certainly in the camp of believing in defence. But where it starts to get a bit confusing, I think, is that we're actually a really high-scoring team. In our, after we beat the Suns in 2021, from that game when we got rolling, we, inclusive of the finals, whatever it was, 6 or 7 games, we averaged 108 points a game. So when our best game, we're attacking because we're running in waves. The first 3 rounds of this season, similarly, we scored 100 points, in each of those 3 games, or in 3 of the first 4, I think. So, I just think that it's probably not such a great thing to now look at this game and go, well, that's some indication of how we're going to play in finals, because it's not.
Red Jacket says, loving the podcast, fellas. Love the balance between the 3 of you. Always insightful, and your analysis is always backed up by the stats. Would love to get your insights into our significant drop in accuracy over the past few rounds. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I have no doubt you guys will, and perhaps shed some light on the cause. Is it loading, fatigue, or just plain reverting to old ways and bad habits? Keep up the great work. Well, I do indeed have the stats to back it up, and perhaps the boys can deduce the reason for the drop. Our mate Justin Giuliano, that he's on Twitter, is at JT Giuliano. That's JTGIULIANO. On Twitter, he has the stats for us, and I think I've just done a hammy, boys. That hurt. Oh. He says, a clear drop-off over the last 3 rounds has been the D's kicking efficiency. Round 10 at Port is understandable given the wet weather, but not sure what's driven the last 2, loading or changing kicking to longer kicks rather than short kicks. And now, but he had a bit of a chart up. So between rounds 1 to 9, in our disposal efficiency, we went 70.5%, 63.2%, 71, 70.9, 66.5, 71.2, 72.4, 64.4, 68.7. That's a range from a low in round 2 against the Lions on a slick deck, remember, at 63.2% to a high of 72.4% in round 7 against the Kangaroos when we kicked 22-7. And contrast that to the last 3 weeks, rounds 10 to 12 against Port in the wet and then Freo and Carlton games. We went 56.2%, 56.5% and 60%. That's a big downward slide. So any thoughts on what could be the cause of this, George? Fatigue, loading, bad habits creeping back in, just plain swings and roundabouts during a year of footy?
I prefer the swings and roundabouts quite simply. The only concern I've got is the accuracy from set shots. I think it's far too difficult to compare non-set shots. But certainly in the last 2 weeks, our set shot kicking from relatively easy positions has been dramatically down. Our numbers this week would have been even worse if Van Rooyen and Gawn hadn't snagged goals from out near the boundary somewhere during the game. But I think it just has to be swings and roundabouts. We were missing shots in the first quarter and have done so in the last last 2 games at least. That's when you're least fatigued. That's when the forwards are better in their best position. Sometimes it happens. Harry Mackay's going through a horror stretch at the moment. People in all sorts of sports, golf, basketball, tennis, all go through bad periods where they normally would score quite freely. For whatever reason, they go through a phase and then they come out at the end, they're still as good as before. The important thing is technique. As long as you stick to your techniques, it'll come back. But yeah, it's just swings and roundabouts sometime. What we have to hope is that swings and roundabouts work for us this weekend.
Big man, any thoughts on our accuracy?
Reverting to mean. I'm not gonna say it's fatigue.
Okay. We'll move on.
But what I will point out is that
they were fatigued.
Because you look at what you just looked at, is that we're still number 1 in the AFL for accuracy from set shots. So our body of work over 12 rounds is a hell of a lot better than it was last year. So I'd rather hang my hat on that than, Port, you can forget it was a wet night. Exactly as George said, you'll have nights when it comes off and you'll have nights when it won't.
Lefty says, just thought I'd air a silly little grievance that I have with the club and their communication of injuries to members. We had 2 classic mystery injuries of the week this week. On Tuesday, when they released the injury list, there was no new injuries to report, yet when the team was released on Thursday, we find out that both Hibbert and McDonald are out injured. No updates on their condition, severity or length of time that they'll be out. Since then, sure, they may have done something on the Wednesday or Thursday, but as there has not been any information since, so members are none the wiser. Then T-Mac puts up an Instagram story of him in a hospital with his foot bandaged, holding a plastic container with a chunk of bone in it, obviously extracted from said foot. Nothing from the club. I get that we need to play the game and keep the opposition clubs guessing, and I have no idea how it works at other clubs, but I find the lack of information to members as of writing this post very poor and frustrating. Silly rant over. Well, as you know, there's been a bugbear of mine since time immemorial. I guess it is part of the game. You know, keep your cards close to your chest, and like the poster, I don't know how it works at other clubs. In this case, it's strange that both were ruled out with injury at selection on Thursday. We now know that Hibberd was managed, but we've heard nothing about Tom McDonald. Has that been even mentioned that he had surgery anywhere on the?
He's had his leg amputated, and we still don't know.
Well, I don't know. We haven't, as of this morning, because I haven't really had time to check. I haven't seen anything. We haven't heard anything regarding. Yeah, well, we know that because he posted something, but the club hasn't said anything. And I get the silence pre-game if you're trying to keep the opposition last week guessing, and I'm cool with that. But surely members should have been updated by now.
I think it's just bad communication that's being run at the moment. There's still players listed, for example, on the AFLW list for Melbourne who were dropped last season. If you go to the website, their faces are still up there, and new players aren't mentioned. I think it's a furphy in this day and age to think that holding off on information that you advantage yourself, except for game day or something like that, because clubs have got information all over and spies, for want of a better word, all over the place. It's well known. I think it just comes down to poor communication. It's simple as plain as that.
Clintosaurus says, the whole narrative about Fritter being greedy is a joke. No way could he have got the ball to Chandler without it being spoiled or having to loop it to Kemp in time to tackle or take possession. He did the right thing. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, that Fritsch goal.
No, I don't know. I didn't hear any criticism of Fritsch.
It was more, I think he's referring more to like in the media and online.
Was there?
Remember last year we had the whole, he was burning teammates, and that's separate to this, but that's joined on to that conversation. But look, I had no problem with that piece of play. Perhaps he kicked perhaps because he kicked the goal, I didn't have that problem. But as Clint mentioned, if he had passed to Chin, he could have failed and would be jumping up and down because we coughed up a certain goal that Fritsch could have kicked himself. Even last year, there were perhaps one or perhaps two times when he genuinely burnt a teammate. But I don't really have a problem with that. He's there to kick goals. He's a 6-goal premiership hero, so the haters can just go themselves.
Oh, the only example in the game that I thought of anyone making a poor decision was that one that I mentioned from Cozzy. Like it would have been the goal of the century if he'd kicked it. Like he was hard on the boundary. But I'm sure, I'm positive that, as I mentioned earlier in the year, that there's been an instruction for go for goal if you're, unless there's 100% better option that's free. And I suspect analytics have got a role to play because, if he kicked the Chandler, that's one more link in the chain for it to, it's almost as hard to kick the Chandler sometimes in that example as to kick the goal. So what's the percentage play is to go for goal? I mean, even if it's 30% easier to get to Chandler, he's still got to make that, and then Chandler's still got to kick the goal. So I suspect just from the way, and as similarly with Spargo's going for a lot more goals this year. A lot of players are having a ping where in previous years it seemed to me the play was to center it or go for a hit up target. So I think that there's an instruction there from the to go for it, particularly probably for Fritter, exactly as your point you make. Unless there's a dead set clear option to pass it.
Travi14 says, I still think we are maybe playing one too many small forwards. Interested in your thoughts. I saw an interesting stat from this guy, Kent, on Twitter, who writes, in what is probably an indication of how Melbourne have really struggled to get their forward half game going this year, Pickett, Spargo and Chandler had 16 tackles inside 50 in round one. They have combined for 33 over the last 11 games. Now, Pickett has missed 2 of those matches. Spargo, I think, missed 3 with concussion, but that averages out to just 3 tackles between the 3 of them in 11 games as opposed to the 16 in round one. Are we playing with one too many small forwards, George?
different answer each week, I think, is this. Sometimes you say yes, sometimes you say no. We're certainly playing a different way. The ball with the territory game, the ball goes in much deeper.
Yep.
People expect forwards, the big forwards, to be taking marks and look spectacular, but the reality is the ball finishes on the ground most of the time. You need the small forwards to be able to crumb the ball when it does come to ground. And as Binman has said, and the stats are right there, we're still scoring goals. So with the leading contenders in this area, what we're doing is working. So why would we change it?
And Spargo and Nibbler really aren't small forwards. They do their work up the ground. You know, they're value to the team. Of course, it's great when Nibbler crumbs it and I go bananas because it's right below me. And Nibbler, front and centre, which was a shocking bit of defence by the Blues to allow him to run free into that spot. And that's, by the way, Smith set that up with a really clever kick, a really nicely weighted kick. So that's 1 point to two of my favourite players. But Spargo and Nibbler are really about their ability to run up and down the ground. And I tell you what, in this game, you watched Nibbler, if you watch the replay, the man of running, like he almost ran himself to the vomit stage. He was out on his feet, Nibbler. And so any goals he gets inside 50, same with Spargo, are purely bonus. So it's really Chandler and Cozzy who are our small forwards. And so I'd say, I wouldn't count those two high half forward flankers. Remember we talked about Tom McDonald said that specific role was that high half forward and that running back between the arcs and running ahead of the ball, the hardest role in football. It's a different role to the deep small forward that Chandler and Cozzy are playing.
Let's move on to Casey. Casey travelled north to the Gold Coast for the second time this season, this time to face the Southport Sharks in a rematch of last year's grand final. After living off the glory of an almost perfect premiership, Casey stumbled after winning the opening 4 games of the season and have struggled in their recent Northern States sojourns. Their only loss in 2022 came at the hands of the Lions in Brisbane, and they were given a touch-up by Gold Coast in round 7 this season. Last week, a team of 14 Melbourne-listed players folded like a rickety card table in the final term of their match at Werribee. Suddenly, they were in 5th place with a few competitors breathing down their necks. Add some injuries and a suspension, and Casey's season was well and truly on the line. As it was a week earlier against Werribee, the Demons were pitted against a committed team with some experienced, mature bodies, desperate for a victory to keep them in finals contention. This time, however, the Demons maintained their composure for most of the game and ran out victors in a thriller by 1 solitary point. Josh Shackey kicked 4 goals from 7 marks. James Jordan was prolific with 30 disposals, 5 clearances, 4 tackles and a goal. A few young Demons who are pushing hard for AFL promotion in Blake Howes, 23 touches, 8 marks. Taj Woden, 23 disposals, 6 tackles and 3 clearances, and Bailey Laurie, 22 touches, 6 tackles, were all busy. Deacon Smith played a strong game as the small defender, while Daniel Turner, Andy Moniz-Wakefield and Ollie Seston all had their moments. Ben Brown kicked 2 goals, 1 from 10 disposals and 4 marks. George, you watched that. Anything else to report briefly?
A few players. Let's the opposition firstly. Southport's probably the best, one of the better sides in the competition. They played off in the grand final last year against us. They've got some seriously good players, and probably Southport should have been the club that was given the licence instead of the Suns, simply because they've got such a strong AFL structure. There's an awful lot of players who were fringe AFL players playing up there on a permanent basis. So, for example,
ex-Melbourne players.
What's his name? Escapes me just off the top of my head. But yeah, they've got a seriously good football structure at Southport. So yeah, they're a great opposition. Players who stood out for me. The other thing in this game, while we only won by 1 point, we lost the ruckman Bell very early in the game. So Shackey was forced to go out into the ruck for substantial portions of it. So we weren't at our best from that particular world because Bell has been playing good football for this season. Seston's starting to become a real standout for me. He seems to be. He's a natural footballer. He knows where to be at the right time,
isn't he?
He's just now that he's got a contract extension. I think we'll see him get better and better because he's able to spend more time at the club training full time, and it's only his first season still. Howes was great, but like all young players, they drop off at points during the game, but he's still getting enough of the ball and he looks very composed. James Jordan was obviously far better than VFL standard. He stood out in a big way. He just keeps on getting ball after ball after ball, so he'll be pressing yet again for a selection in some way, shape or form. Andy Monde's Wakefield was great again, but again, like Laurie, the question for these sort of players is if they're good, and Woden's probably in a similar sort of position as well, is who do they replace? Somebody's got to have an injury for them to get a run in the first effectively. So they're still playing good football. They're winning a game against a team like this. It was good to see. Shaki kicked 4 goals, but Shaki was Shaki in a way. A lot of his uncontested marks that he's taking. Ben Brown looks like he's walking through treacle at the best of times. And when the ball hits the ground, he becomes a liability. I thought we'd be saving him up for the second half of the season, but based on those sort of performances, he's got to show much more to get the value to get back into the senior side. And I don't know that he will if he continues like that. A win's a win. We've got a couple of players down there who are looking promising. But unfortunately, there's not too many, probably apart from JJ, who are really pushing for selection at the senior level.
Let's get on to the training report. Demonland track watcher Kev Martin ventured down to Gosh's paddock to bring us the following training report from today's session. The players were on the paddock early, so it was difficult to see who had light duties, as most are already in the main group. Harry Petty still running and kicking in his rehab phase, though still in runners. Kai Turner in boots, but still progressing in his running program. Hibbo training, Will Varell training, James Harms training, but he could not see Clayton Oliver. That was alarm bells to me. We've now found out. Big Man, I don't know, have you heard that he did not train because he has infected blisters? It was released by the Demons on Twitter tonight. So he will be racing against time to be, well, I don't know, fit's the word, but right to play because ready. Yeah,
that's such a coincidence because that's the name of my old rock band, Infected Blisters. So. Infected blisters. Where are the blisters?
Well, I assume on his feet.
On his feet. Yeah, is that like good?
So there you go. We'll talk about
him now somewhere else.
Okay. No Ben.
Well, I don't. Look, he'll play with infected blisters all over his body. Surely he doesn't.
No Ben Brown, no Jake Bowie. Kev asked a staff member and they said that Bowie was progressing well in the concussion protocols. He also said that they know that they won ugly against Carlton and expected a close one against Collingwood. Extensive training session, plenty of running and a drill I haven't seen before. They play keepings off using an outside circle of players with the defenders inside the circle, a kind of soccer warm-up formation but a larger area. Then ball movement drills using 3/4 of the field, one group with the mids passing it around by hand till a whistle and they find an outside runner that comes from the defensive group who delivers to leading forwards. 2 groups, one looking inside, the other towards the boundary for the runners. They're finishing up with more running. Another 10 and we go again. T-Mac is observing from a wheelie frame as his foot is heavily bandaged. That was the end of the session. A few stay back goal kicking and some pair up for ball handling. Sparrow and Laurie, Salem and McVie. And Varell was in for some extra running with a trainer on his shoulder. So that's training. And as he said, running and more running. Couldn't be loading for something.
Did you say a trainer on his shoulder?
Well, I don't think
it was pretty hard.
Behind his shoulder. If he was running with someone on his shoulders, literally, yeah.
That's how he got the infected blisters.
Well, that's not. That was Varell, not Oliver. You have something to add about training?
Back to Clary.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean in terms of his? Have you got any more detail other than
the only detail? I believe Melbourne put out a tweet, and I will just pull it up as we're talking now.
It may not be accurate then.
Well, the communication there has a picture. Injury update: Clayton Oliver missed training this morning with an infected blister. Just clicking on the link. And that's our returning midfielder. Clayton Oliver was sidelined by a troublesome blister on Tuesday as the dynamic Demon works his way back from a hamstring injury. Oliver continues to make progress in his hamstring rehabilitation with a number of strong sessions now under his belt. Clayton had a really successful reconditioning session on Saturday morning with the group. Club high performance managers and friend of the program, Selwyn Griffith, says. Unfortunately, he has an infected blister which prevented him from training today. We'll assess the day today as we prep for our main training session on Friday. So that's all we know at the moment.
Okay, that's a new one.
Yes, so there you go. Let's talk changes. The King. And this is my preamble into this. It might be moot at this point. The King is slated to return for our all-important King's birthday clash on the MCG on Monday, providing he gets through all the training sessions this week and also overcomes some blisters. Clayton Oliver will make his return to the side. Singer asks, how confident are we that Clary is right to go and or that he will play this week? Well, it all changes now that we've heard that. We all want him to play this week against the Pies, but would he be playing this week against the Eagles? George, my question to you here was, is he a lock to make his return? Would we be risking him if it wasn't such an important match, I guess, from the hamstring thing? Forget the blisters for a moment.
From the hamstrings, we spoke about this last week. Most hamstrings are fixed within 2 weeks, and they usually hold off for an extra week to reduce the risk of recurrence. We're up to the 3-week stage as of this week, so I expect Clary to play. On the news tonight, Max was interviewed, and he was asked the question, will Clary play this week? And he said, Goody has said he will, so I guess he will. So as simple as that, no questions asked. I'm sure he'll read that.
Yeah. The question is, no disrespect to the Eagles, but if we were playing the Eagles, do you think we'd be playing him this week?
Yeah, I think he would. There's no reason not to. The original diagnosis of the injury was a very mild one. So why would you keep a player like Clary away from football where he does his best work? Doesn't matter whether it's the Eagles or Collingwood.
Yeah, and even if they wouldn't play him at all, if there was any question, it's not that important a match. I mean, of course we want to win, but if there's any chance at all that it's going to, re-injure it, there's no way they would take that risk.
Yeah.
Why would they? I mean, they did with Steve May because that was to win a grand final.
Well, that's the last game.
This isn't a grand final, despite it being Collingwood's grand final.
Oh, yeah. The Collingwood supporters might argue and say the reverse. D-Minion says, might be a moot point because you probably discussed Smith tonight and perhaps come to the conclusion that he plays again this week, which I think we all have. Hypothetically, do you think Shaki might be in the discussion given his 9 goals in the past 3 matches at Casey? And I think we've answered that one as well. Big man, and then George, we sticking with Smith or we trying someone else? You can't just not.
I think Smith was brought in with the Collingwood game in mind. So, he'll play. I would be shocked if he doesn't play.
Yeah, agreed.
Roger Melly says, I think it'll be interesting to see if Tomo gets another gig. I like the third tall being there and Tomo didn't do a whole lot wrong. I wonder, though, given his lack of mobility, would Turner be a better option against the Filth? More mobile and suited to Collingwood's smaller key position forwards, Myercheck and Johnson. I think both would be ineffective against Cox. Would you consider Turner? I mean, he played in this game last year, but he came in, didn't he? Didn't we have an injury last year? Was May injured? Is that who he replaced last season? Was it Petty? No, I think Petty got injured during the match as well. Remember?
Yeah, Petty got injured during that. Came in for Lever from memory.
Lever, yeah.
They're not going. I can't see them making any changes they don't need to because Goody is so. Part of his philosophy is consistency of selection and having the as much as possible. The same players playing week. Go back to when he first started. How many times has he made more than 2 or 3 changes in a match? I mean, there's been, of course, a handful of times, but tops out at 1 or 2. Unless there's injury or whatever. I think Tomo will get another gig. Deserves it too. We talked about it. I thought he played all right. He got outpointed by a terrific player, but as the comment was made from Rue Beauty, it's about the 44 points, not how many he gave away. And maybe the fact that they enabled that to do was, obviously a big factor in it. I'll be curious though, because I'm not sure, Majacek is a sneaky good footballer.
He's good.
And one
I
of
like
my
him.
favourite
Yeah.
non-Melbourne
I like him.
players. I just love the way he plays footy. But I reckon Tomo, how quick is Majacek? He's sort of,
you don't really see him
can Tomo go with him?
kick his goals as a running guy. He's not leading out really. He's taking him in the square.
I think Tomo will get the role on Cox more than anything, simply because he's tall. What it'll mean is that Tomo's actually going to have to change the way he plays football. You cannot afford to let Cox get in front of you. So Tomo unlike when he played against Mackay, you can't afford to play from behind, because if Cox will simply lead out and you will never get your hand to the ball once he's out in front of you. Yeah, so and that's the reason why I think he'll stay in the side. He's got the height, whereas Turner hasn't got the same sort of height. Hibbert will come back in as a replacement for Bowie.
I was just going to ask that. Who comes in for Bowser?
But it's also about the structure. We need Lever to do what Lever does best. We need May to do what May does best. I think May might pick up someone like Majacek and would be best suited to him. But Majacek's a very good player. He's a great contested mark, and he reads the plays and reads the ball so well. You can expect him to kick a couple of goals without any doubt. I think Tomo will finish up on Cox more than anything.
And then the key is not Tomo versus Cox. The key is support, isn't it? Is Lever getting across and Maxi dropping back, and and then the next key is winning the ground ball inside 50. Which is a stat I can't find anywhere, and I think that's almost the critical number for the Pies, because they are so good when the ball hits the deck at both ends, and it's an area of weakness. But again, on the weekend, I thought we were much better than we have been when the ball hit the deck, and that's why I was spewing that Bowie went out, because I thought his ground ball game was the best it's been all season, and McVie was terrific when the ball hit the deck, and I mentioned Salem before. He was excellent too in that area as well. So it's all about that defense. And just quickly on that three talls, not so much for up them, but up forward. There was that's the clip I tried to find that I couldn't find, that I was going to ask you to play, Andy, that Richo was interviewed on SEN in the lead up to the Blues game. I was listening on the train on the way in, and it was hilarious. Brad Johnson was bagging Melbourne's forward setup and said they just got to get more separation. They've got to create more one-on-ones. They've got to split. And Richo was asked, that came on about 20 minutes later, and Johnson asked him that question. Said, well, your forwards have got to separate more. They've got to get more separation, and you've got to create more one-on-ones, which was the criticism of last week. You might remember a lot of people were criticising the forwards, and I really like Richo. He's a good thinker about the game. He's an ex-senior AFL coach. He knows what he's talking about, and without trying to be insulting to Brad Johnson, he said, well, look, the subtext was, you've been out of footy for a while, because what he said is that you can't do that in modern footy. You can't separate, because if you separate, that means you've got one player who's no longer in the contest, and that's what the opposition want. The game plans of almost all clubs is multiple players going up for the ball and trying to bring it down if you can't mark. A mark is a bonus. There's a gilt-edged bonus. It's bringing it to the ground inside your forward 50. And I just thought it was an excellent, casual, a polite rebuttal of, look, you're saying rubbish.
And zone defences, you don't get one-on-ones with zone defences, as simple as that.
Yeah, and I mean, I hadn't thought about that point, but it was a really interesting point to say, well, sure, if you get separation, that's wonderful. That means JVR is all by himself out on the outer wing, not having any influence on the game of footy.
Yeah.
So essentially, it just becomes a decoy.
Well, let's get into the preview proper of the match against the Magpies. It's a top three clash at the MCG on Monday for the annual King's Birthday clash between the AFL's darlings, the Magpies, and the wicked stepchild, the Demons. The Magpies are in the competition's benchmark, sitting atop the table on 11 wins and 1 loss. A win this week for the Demons would be a massive scalp and boost the Demons' credentials as a genuine contender for the flag. A loss will surely see us drop out of the top 4 after the bye round and put further questions on our ability to match it with the competition's best. Buck Neckard says, defence wins finals. I am much happier giving away a lower score than other teams, like the Cats that played ping pong most of the night. I think this was why Goody was wrapped with the result and why I was very happy with what we did. The Blues players went hard, but we went harder. Still significant upside is available in our game plan and in our key players and structures. I think we will win against the Pies due to our defence and pressure. I would welcome your insight into Collingwood's defensive structures and how we should play to defeat them. B-Man, you want to have a crack at that?
Well, looking ahead for this and doing some prep for this, I was surprised by some of the numbers. But, as a general thing, the difference between our defensive system and their defensive system is, people will know how we set up now. And it was really good on Friday because it was a reversion to that, it was really visible with that, think of a triangle, 3 points of the triangle. And one of those points is that goalkeeper role so we always keep that player deep behind the ball. That's critical to the way we defend. That means that we do turn the ball over and the opposition get through that first line of defenders and get between that back of that line and the goal, there's Lever there or there's May there or, when Petty's playing there or Petty, whoever is back in that hole, and that means they've got to cross or wait until their numbers get there. Whereas the Pies, they push up. It's the way I think of it is like a line that comes up from the back half, and they don't do that as much. They don't run that deep sweeper or goalkeeper, whatever you want to call that role, and they push up super hard. And as a line, the thing about them, all teams' fitness is important, but for the Pies, perhaps the most important because that model is super risky and it exposes them to turnover because the line's all pushing up as one. If the ball's turned over, that whole defensive unit's got to sweep back and get back to defend. What I was really curious about looking at just on the defense, Goody's put a stake in the ground in recent weeks to reinforce that the fundamental DNA for us is defence. And McRae is often, regarded, and I guess he is, from what he's saying, is further towards the offensive end of that scale on that, the risk-reward offence versus defence scale. Logic would suggest then that the team with a more offensive coach would be higher scoring than the defensive team, but then what to make of the fact that at the halfway point of the season, as I mentioned before, both teams have played the easy beats, in the Eagles and the Roos, so that's taken out of the equation. That we've scored 38 more points than them despite losing 3 more games. How does that marry up with them being the attacking side? But interestingly, the overall season rankings tell a different tale than the sort of eye test that people love to apply to these things. The D's are number 2 AFL ranked side for attack, and we're 5th for the defence. The interesting stat for this is the Pies are the number 1 defensive ranked side and 5th in attack. So we're actually a higher ranked attacking side. They're a higher ranking defense side. So, again, it's about this narrative that the media loves to, frame everything in, and then people fall in line with it. On the attack defense rating chart, you see it they show it on the couch often enough, and they talk about it being a good guide for the likely premier. So the on the vertical axis is the attacking rating and the defensive ratings on the horizontal. We're out in front in the top right corner of that, and the Pies are next. So that positions us very well for a flag, and them too, but us better. The overall AFL rankings, have got them at number 2, and we're number 2 behind the Lions, but the Pies are a fair way back on 169. So their defensive system on those numbers is a lot better than I expected. And one of the interesting things is what George was saying. So Quain or Murphy and Moore play a critical role with intercepting. So one of the interesting defensive stats is they're number one in the AFL for stopping teams getting inside their defensive 50, which tells me a couple of things, one of which is that those three players that I mentioned get up the ground off halfback flank and intercept outside the defensive 50. So, I think that's a really important point about the way they defend. They defend, when you hear the commentators say that they defend high, that's what they mean, but they're really, really good at keeping opposition, or the best in the AFL at keeping opposition outside their defence. But a weird stat that I thought, given how, that they are pretty strong in defence, and this is a real vulnerability that we might look to be able to exploit. They're 18th for defensive one-on-one contests. We're second. So we're second in the AFL for winning for the defensive one-on-one contest, and they're way down in 18. But probably a better stat for that is the percentage of the defensive one-on-one contest loss. The Pies are mid-table still, better than 18th, obviously, but just above AFL average, losing just under 25% of the defensive one-on-ones, which is interesting because given Quaynor a few weeks ago hadn't lost a single one-on-one all season. So he obviously wins a huge percentage of their one-on-ones. So the others must really struggle. So that's a real vulnerability for them. We're number one in the AFL. We're only losing 18% of our defensive one-on-ones, which is a huge gap back to theirs at 25. So that's a big number. The other one, we're number one for averaging inside 50s. They're 3. So they're getting the ball into their forward line. But that's from that winning the ball up on, in front of on their half back line and not allowing it in. So they're defensively a lot better than I'd perhaps thought when I had drilled down on the numbers. And so maybe they're playing a bit of ducks and drakes as well, allowing that narrative of them being a high-scoring side and offensive. And maybe that's a bit of a narrative game that McRae's playing.
But the other interesting thing is, I think you're right that the Quaynors, the likes, are playing outside the 50-metre arc because they're part of the attacking process. And fundamentally, I think the difference is Collingwood's the classic run and gun game plan, and you require those sort of players to be run. And you see it the way they play. As soon as they get the ball, there's this massive wave comes from the half-back line and moves forward. That's why they get so many inside 50s. It's because of that wave and attack. But just as equally, it means that the inside 50 for them simply doesn't occur because they're attacking all the time. It's their weakness as well, because if the turnover occurs, they're up the ground and out of position and can't get back. The other interesting thing, I think, that the way Collingwood play, and I think it was simply because of the Tom Mitchell being selected for them. Suddenly they had someone who was able to get inside ball to the outside. And they're able to. And previously, they've had to rely on people like Sidebottom and Pendlebury playing on the inside. Well, now they don't, and you get the ball to players of that quality who deliver the ball. That becomes lethal. So the loss of Sidebottom, I think, is going to affect them, particularly over the next couple of months. Pendlebury's still there, who's simply superb, and Dacos, of course. The other interesting thing that I picked up from looking at their statistics, everybody wets themselves, particularly the Collingwood supporters, about Nick Dacos. Josh is getting almost the same number of stats. Yeah, he is just as good as player as Nick. One's a bit flashier than the other, but you can't afford to let one go and not the other. So, Collingwood's game plan is not about contested possession, but guess what ours is? If we get the contested possessions and deny them the opportunity to get the ball out to their better ball users, then their whole game plan will be exposed. So it'll be a real interesting start to the game, in particular now that we're bringing Clary back in with Petracca in good form. If we stop people like Mitchell getting the ball out, they won't have anything to fall back on.
So, and that's why it's not really a game of two different styles. They're, in fact, I think they're actually very similar. I've made this point a few times, but the club, Richmond have been super influential. That template of chaos sweeping, I mean, that's Richmond's game. It's just a bit more chaotic. What exactly as I said, George, the difference that the Pies have done is that half-back line all move up in one. So they're, if you think that Lever's our back defender, well, he can't participate in a wave running up the ground because he's got to stay back. All of their defenders participate in that wave running, so they've got an extra runner in that chain, if you like. But we do that too. When we're on, we run in waves. We run ahead of the ball. So they're not actually that different. The other number that sort of indicates how well the Pies do at stopping teams getting into their forward 50 is they're number one for least opponents metres gained. So, they do a great job of stopping them. And that's what we'll be focused on doing, is getting through that line. And I totally agree with what you're saying, George. Their vulnerability, they remind me a lot of the Dogs in 21, and the Dogs sort of strategy and the sort of key feature of their game that was different to other clubs in 21 was chaining out from the contest to handballs and training down the ground and on transition with handballs. And I said it that year, and it came to pass in terms of the grand final. That was their biggest vulnerability, because all of those links in the chain are opportunities for it to break down. Collingwood are really, really similar in the way that they do that, except what they're looking to do is not to keep transitioning up the ground by handball, and they'll do that if they can. They're looking to get it out into space to one of their elite ball users. So in particular, the two Dacos brothers, I completely agree with what you say about Josh Dacos, side bottom, and Pendlebury. And the other really, really good field kick, who they use a lot in the corridor, not to get it so much, but in the corridor, is DeGoey. So DeGoey and side bottom out is massive for them, because those elite ball kicks are key to the way that they look to take risks. So it's, a calculated risk. And obviously it's a bit like us with Hunter. Hunter's going to have more freedom to take that ball, that kick into the corridor than Nibbler. And, for good reason. The same for them, Murphy, for instance, is not, maybe I'm confusing him, but, some of their defenders aren't great kicks. So ideally, they're not the ones taking that kick into the corridor. They'll leave that to the Dacos brothers, Pendlebury and Sidebottom. So I think they're two really big outs. I mean, goes without saying, obviously.
So I think you've just debunked Engorged Onion, what he says. He says, I think we'll be focused. I think it'll be a fascinating match to watch, seeing two dichotomous styles going head-to-head, summarised as all-out attack versus stingy, grinding defence. He's saying we play a similar style.
And the game I'd look to as a thing is to how I hope it goes, and how it is our game. I think it was our round 15 game against Brisbane last year, when we came out after a break and went bananas. We hadn't scored over 6. I think we scored 61 points, was our most in a block of about 6 weeks or something like that. And everyone on Demon Lamb was having the same commentary now. God, we're boring, we're slow, we can't score, yada, 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 yada. And we come out and flog the Lions on the MCG by 10 plus goals. Not to say that, of course, that's going to happen, but we went from being a stingy, slow team that struggled to score to, wow, we just scored 15, I think 16, 17 goals in that game, 121 points I think we scored or something like that. So, I expect that we will attack them. We won't defend them. We will attack them, and we'll look to do what Georgia was saying and exploit that vulnerability and through pressure and contested ball, break down that chain and allow them to go. I think it's really important to remember is that the 3 critical games that this club has played, the Pies, last year, were the finals last year. Forget this year. With the finals last year, Freo were pretty average in that game, but the Pies played well. They lost the other 2. In under pressure games, the Cats and the Swans, high pressure, low scoring games of footy, they lost, and both games they lost because they turned it over under pressure, both of them. So, I think that everyone talks, that's why I say they're overrated. They've not won a flag, but what I would say is they've had an outsized influence on the approach, and I think Goody's definitely, they brought in that fast ball movement, the wave off the multiple players running to combat our defensive style, and Goody's taken that information and looked at it, and I think personally he can't wait to tactically have a go at it. So yeah, it promises to be a terrific match, but I don't see them as dichotomous game plan.
Nairobi Demon says, I've not seen the Pies play, but I often read that they bring 2 extras to the stoppage. From what positions do they usually take those players, and who therefore is likely to be free for us, and how damaging could they be, for example, on the turnover/rebound? George?
I think we've covered this off a bit. I'm not sure that they do bring 2 extra players. What they're playing is the inside and outside game really well.
They do bring an extra and one extra, I'm sure, normally.
But it's getting the ball to those outside players is the critical factor, and I think that's where we'll overcome them with our quality inside mids. Tom Mitchell averages 14 contested possessions a game. You shut down him, stop the ball going out to the Pendleburys and the other runners that they've got, and their whole game changes dramatically. So if they're bringing extras to the contest, I don't think they're in the contest or on the outside of the contest.
They bring an extra to create, to maximise their likelihood of winning a particular contest, and that's the difference. And it goes back to this thing we've been talking about all season about the clearances. We don't, and so that's why we're able to have our lever back. And so the answer to that question is the ability to have the spare defender back as the goalkeeper is because we don't bring the extra. So my assumption is that Collingwood bring their extra up from half-back flank, the Quaynors or they're pushing up off the half-back flank to get all their wingers. They're pushing to that contest. But it's a gamble, isn't it? Because they've got to win it. If we then beat them in the clearances, well, that takes away one of their key scoring avenues. And our focus is on creating turnover. So they're 18th for clangers in the AFL for turnovers, which is a fantastic number for us because our biggest scoring source is turnovers. So their biggest weakness, partly that's because of the high risk kicks they take. So it's not just that that they're bad at football. That's part of their strategy, but they're they miss more, turn it over more often than anyone, and that's our most important scoring source. So that's another big tick for us in terms of coming up against them.
Roby Demon also says in 2021 we tagged, I think, Libba in our first game against the Dogs. Harms did the work, if I recall correctly. It nullified his influence at the coalface, and in my opinion, that win really solidified our contender credentials. Do you think we'll look to tag or run with Dacos, and who could do the job? Big man?
It's a fascinating question.
We don't really tag.
Other
teams have done it to Dacos to some effect.
Well, I reckon George has hit the nail on the head. I reckon they're more likely to tag Mitchell because he's, as George noted, he's 12 plus contested possessions a game. We've got contested ball winners across every line. He's a critical player. If we can take him out of the equation, I mean, Dacos he's a phenomenal player, isn't he? And so it's a really interesting how they'll do it. I'm wondering whether Goody will allow him to have the kicks in the back half. He's number one for them for averaging 26, tick over 26 effective disposals per game. Uncontested, he's their leading uncontested ball winner. He bounces per game. Not that that's a major stat, but it just shows he's running. Metres gained, he's their number one. He's averaging 530 metres gained. So he's obviously a critical player for them. I mean, it goes without saying. But really, it's more about that, the strategy of getting it, as George was saying, from the contest out to space and ideally getting it to him. A few weeks ago, I would have thought, of course, you're going to tag him but do we have a player who can do that job? Harmsy, maybe, but I just don't think they're going to bring Harms in. So is there another player that could do it? I wonder whether they'll sit McVie on him. McVie will probably go to him or Hill. But, I could see Goody doing something like, Judd, here's your job for the day. You don't have to tag him hard, but I want you to run with Dacos. I don't know. It's a fascinating question, but if I was to have a bet, I would bet that we won't tag him because Goody doesn't generally tag, and our best tag is not likely to be selected.
Bigfoot says, and we've sort of talked about the matchups, a couple of big matchups in defence on King's birthday. The bigs, Mason Cox, Ash Johnson, Brodie Myercheck, all three have given us problems before. Pains me to say it, but I'm worried the most about Cox, Who takes who? So we said Tomlinson on Cox. So that leaves us with Johnson and Myercheck. May on Myercheck.
Yeah, I think that's the logical one. Johnson's always going to be difficult.
He's got a great pair of hands.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Yeah, we're probably going to have Hibberd back this week as well, who's great at providing body contact for these sort of players, denying them the opportunity to jump in the first place. So I think we've got them reasonably well covered. But Myercheck, I think, is the biggest threat to us. He consistently gets multiple goals against us in the past. So the others, I think, are a little bit more week-by-week proposition. But we've got the players to do it. That's the main thing. And the main thing is to make sure that Lever's left free to do what Lever needs to do.
My worry is Hill.
Well, that's the next thing. We usually struggle. Bigfoot says we usually struggle against the Charlie Cameron, Tom Papley type forwards who runs with Bobby Hill.
Well, you'd think McVie would get. He played on who's the Carlton small. I've gone blank. That's the role we played on the weekend. So, it would be a good matchup for him because he's not going to be too strong for him. Hill's not particularly strong player, so that seems to me the logical one. I'd be going on him. I mean, McVie, what did I say before? McVie playing on Dacos, they're not going to play McVie on Dacos, are they? So.
But we've also got Salem and Rivers playing good football down there as well.
George, tell us why you think the Demons will win.
I think it's going to come down to what our meat and veggies is, the contested possession. We've got better contested bulls in Petracca, Oliver and Viney, with Sparrow as a very good number 4. You deny Collingwood the ball, and they can't use it as efficiently as they have done so for the majority of this season. So, again, you come back to people like Darcy Moore's stats. It's all about uncontested possession. That's what they want. Uncontested possession, free range with the ball. They've got a couple of players who are fantastic users of the ball in kicking in particular. So you just have to deny them. If they get on top in those areas, I think we'll overcome them. We should have a better rucking combination than what they have to be able to give us the best chances both in the centre and around the ground. I'm sure Mr. Grundy will be a little bit fired up. And he's apparently on the news tonight. He's saying that he wants to have the first bounce in the game. So that'll get the Collingwood fans fired up right from the very start.
And I really hope they don't boo him. I know we've had similar things.
They will.
Yeah, but you know what? He was turf from them, basically.
Yeah.
I don't think they should. We talked about whether you clap Luke Jackson the other week. And I'm not suggesting that they should or would or will clap him, but I really hope they don't mercilessly boo him. All right, maybe in the first possession, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think both Brodie and Max will provide us a lot more marking power around the ground, particularly if they follow on from their efforts last week, than what the Collingwood Rucks are able to do.
Then again, we booed, just going back to that, we booed Baker. So, and if that's us doing that to a guy who really did nothing, then...
Ironic boos. Maybe the Pies will do some ironic boos.
I don't know if they know what the word ironic means or how to use it properly. Now, Positive Binners has been tasked with the most impossible task for him anyway. Bin-Man, tell us why you think the Magpies will, or if you prefer might, win this match.
Oh, well, that was my task to come up with the rationale for why. And I look back at last week's game, so I watched the Eagles-Pies game to help me inform that. And, even though they won by 63 points, they were pretty average given the Eagles were down by 2 on the bench for a big part of the match. And they lost contested possession by 7, which goes to the point that George makes. That's absolutely an area of strength for us. And they lost the clearances by 10 and had one fewer inside 50 against the Eagles with 2 men on the bench. And sorry, Andy, I couldn't come up with a single reason why the Pies were going to beat us, and I don't think they will. I'm really confident the D's will win. So I know that was what I was tasked with doing. I know that I even volunteered to give the Pies side of the argument, but the more I looked at it, the more I thought, well, I can't do that. It's just, I can't say the words either. I just think they're a overrated football team. I think we're going to win, and I cannot wait.
I knew you would fail at that task.
Without promoting it, Ben Man, what do the bookies say?
Well,
gamble
interesting
responsibly.
You should say that, Georgie. We opened up. They opened up slight favourites. Basically, it's going to start even money. We've tightened since, and that's my sense about what the betting market is. The most accurate guide in football. Forget all the analysis. It's the most accurate guide in footy. It's an even money game. But you watch the next 5-6 days of media coverage, you'd think it was the top team playing the 18th team, the way people will talk about our chances. But I think, I'm really confident that we'll win. I'm so looking forward to it, but it's an even money bet. I really think side bottom out is massive. He's such a smart player. Like, he makes such good decisions, and there's no question De Goey is their most potent player. He's the player he's our track. He's a player who can turn the game on its head. He's been in phenomenal form this season. He deserved, I don't know what did he end up getting. Has it been
3 weeks?
3 weeks.
He should have got more.
Yeah, he absolutely should have got more. But
I cannot believe he only got 3.
The MRO could have just handed him 3 because that's what it is for that grading.
But he's a massive out because he's a huge part of their final part of their puzzle to score. He's a match winner. So the 2 of their best 5 players are out of this team. Bowie's a big out for us, but not in that sort of category. So for me, that really weights the game in our favour.
They got a few other injury concerns as well. They've got, just looking at their injury, what's the date today? It's the 6th, so this is updated. Jamie Elliott, shoulder test. Will Hoskin-Elliott, ankle test.
McCreary is at a moon boot at the moment.
McCreary ankle. Well, he says he's out because it's ankle TBC, so I doubt he's in the picture. So,
to be confirmed whether he's playing, I think, not the length of time. But McCreary would be huge out because he is one of those players that will come up to be at the extra at the stoppage here, and he's a fantastic runner. Probably one of their best in the team. So he's a big out. But the other one is Elliott. I would love for Elliott not to be playing. I've heard people say I'd want best to play Collingwood at full strength. I'm happy for every one of their stars not to be playing. But Elliott is exactly the sort of mid-sized player that we struggle with a little bit. So he'd be a huge out as well.
The other one that was reported on the news tonight was Braden Maynard. Didn't train. He was crook, according to the football manager.
Yeah,
what that means, I've got no idea. But
Crook, he's playing.
Maynard as well, that would be a real problem for them.
He's playing. Crook, what's that? Crook gut, cold. Even
crook
COVID
knee.
this day, he'll be back.
And Andy, are you going to volunteer to train Ollie's blisters?
Yeah, well, if anything to get him
anything
up.
For the club?
Yeah, why not? Team first, eh?
Yeah, so aloe vera or salve or some such.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Well, I think we're going to leave it there. We've gone well over the 2-hour mark, as I thought we would. I actually thought it might go longer, but I think we did well, guys. We'll be back next week, Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. Possibly even we might even discuss it. Might. We've got to do a mid-season review, don't we? So we'll talk about that off the air. If you want to listen to the show live, please join us at demonland.com probably Tuesday night at 8:30 at Demonland.
Monday if we win, and then just do a joyous.
That could be good. That could be good.
I won't be able to speak.
Yeah, well,
I'll be hoarse.
I'm sure these umpires will make me lose my voice.
I haven't looked forward to a game of footy as much for a long time, I reckon.
That's great. It's going to be 90,000 plus there. We've got the slide before. I always enjoy that. It's sort of a really good atmosphere on this day. So,
14 degrees.
Yeah,
the long-range forecast is 14 degrees.
Any rain?
With the chance of rain, 0 to 2 mils.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought for the Port Adelaide game, and a bucket at Cats and Dogs. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers, Rabbits Wells 11, Peter Lovin, the Footy Coach, and Demon Tragic. Thank you to our voicemailer, Rue Beauty. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Phil C, D-Star9, Lazy, Spirit of Norm Smith, Hoof-Hearted, D-Nox, Bush Demon, Detox, Travi14, Deceiving, Man D. Lorian, Oh My D's, Weber, D Old Fart, Doug Reamer, Demon WA, Fanatic Demon, Fritter the Hair Goat, Red Jacket, Lefty, Clintosaurus, Singer, D-Minion, Roger Melly, Buck Naked, Nairobi Demon, Engorged Dungeon, and Bigfoot. And thank you to Kev Martin for his training report. As always, it's great that he gets down there and gives us what's happening on a Monday or a Tuesday. Thank you to my co-hosts, as always, George and Bimman. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read them out on the next show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.